Everything you're about to hear is for education and entertainment purposes only. Whilst we are licensed, we're not aware of your personal financial circumstances. Any advice is general advice. Equity Mates operates under Australian Financial Services Licence 540697.
Equity Mates!
I will say this about investing. Everything you do learn is cumulative. What I learned at 20 is useful.
Welcome to Equity Mates, a podcast where we explore what is possible in the world of investing. If you've just joined us for the first time, a huge welcome to the community. My name is Bryce, and today we are back with another Ask an Advisor episode. To chat through it, as always, I'm joined by my equity buddy, Ren. How are you?
I'm very good, Bryce. Very excited for this episode. We love this Ask an Advisor series. We know that for too many Australians, financial advice is inaccessible. Just because of the number of advisors in the market or the cost of advice. And so Ask an Advisor is our way of bringing professional financial advisors closer to the Equity Mates community. It's your chance to ask your questions and get them answered by the experts. And we've got a new expert joining us today.
We do. We have Pargiter-Green. He's the director and an advisor at Bold Wealth. Now, today, Dylan is going to join us and we're going to have a conversation about the later years in life, that pre-retiree stage in life where you're thinking more about your post-accumulation phase of life and thinking about setting up for the golden years, as they call them. So we found this interview very interesting because our parents are going or in that stage already, and it also helped us think about setting up for that stage as we progress as well.
Yeah, I think it's important to stress that while Dylan focuses his practice on older Australians, we really in this interview kind of mine him for the mistakes he sees that those older Australians are making when they're younger.
Yes.
Like one of our first questions is going to be, what are people screwing up in their 30s that he's seeing in his clients in his 50s and 60s?
Yeah.
We're going to talk about planning for education costs because
huge.
For some percentage of the Equity Mates audience, it's important that their kids go to private school. And if you've looked at the cost of private school lately...
I heard the other day that so a couple of our mates have just had babies and putting their kids on private school wait lists. Some of them are $500 to get on the wait list.
Do you have to pay it each year?
No, I think it was just to start.
Okay.
But then when you get, I think, 3 years out, it's $7,000 a year.
No, to stay on.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Such a
What
good
the
business.
hell? I know.
Here's a question. Why isn't there a listed
Gosh,
private school?
A listed private school. True.
But look, we also talk about paying down debt or your mortgage / investing. Again, it's like Dylan sees the effects of the choices that people are making in their 20s and 30s when he starts seeing their clients later in life. So we really try and unpack what we should be doing at our age to put us in our best positions for when we go and see someone like Dylan.
That's it. So all of these questions have come from the Equity Mates community. Thank you so much to everyone who has submitted them. If you'd like to submit one, head to equitymates.com/contact for our next Ask an Advisor. But also more importantly, we can connect you with Dylan and a number of other trusted advisors within the Equity Mates within the Equity Mates network, I should say, depending on where you are on your investing and finance journey. So head to equitymates.com/advice and there's a form there to fill out that will give us all the information that we need to connect you with the right advisors. And as I'm learning throughout these episodes, whilst the upfront cost is prohibitive and is expensive, there are instances where, you know, we've seen time and time again, people do get a lot of value once they start the process. So don't let the cost stop you from at least trying to speak to these guys. A lot of them have a non-obligation free session as well to understand how the process works and the costs involved. So equitymates.com/advice.
Yeah, there's no doubt that financial advice is worth it.
Yeah.
But that's the problem with that's why our gripe is that it's so expensive.
Yeah.
Because we think financial advisors are so valuable that more Australians should be able to access them.
True. Anyway, we're doing our best to give you the information here for free. So we hope you enjoy this conversation with Dylan. We'll put a link in the show notes to equitymates.com/advice. Dylan, welcome to Equity Mates.
Pleasure to be here, boys.
Yes, it is exciting. So, Dylan, you speak to a lot of older accumulators or sort of pre-retiree people in your job, and we don't often cover a lot of content that is directly applicable to those. But we are going to today. And to kick off, I think it's worth getting your view on when you see all of these clients hitting that point in their life, what are a lot of the things, or what is one thing that they often get wrong in their 30s that they're coming to you being like, I need some help with?
They don't start early enough. So the biggest thing that people say when they come to us in their 50s or 60s is, gee, I wish I'd met you 10 years ago. and like, the sooner you start, the smaller the things that you need to do to get to the larger position later on. It's really simple, always goes back to that very, very basic concept of compounding. So if you start putting $100 away now a week, it's the same as 20 years later you needing to put $2,000 away a week to get to the same point at 65 or whatever it might be. So yeah, it's starting early, not being afraid to jump into something that's a little bit uncertain as well. Just do the thing that you are afraid of, and the worst case is you're going to get told to come back in 5 years. And
what about for those that are listening that feel like it's too late in their journey to actually start? What do you say to that?
Yeah, it's never too late. I mean, we all have an asset pool. Some people have a very large asset pool and some people have a very small asset pool. But it's a little bit like going to the gym, right? Like if you're unfit to the point of being incredibly unhealthy, it's generally still going to be better off if you start going to the gym or you start exercising. The same if you're 60 and you've only ever put money away through your superannuation through your employer, or if you've only paid off your house at that point, you don't really know what else to do. There are so many different things that you can do at that point to make sure that you're ready for what that next step is. And gaining that certainty and that peace of mind, that makes sometimes a bigger difference than the actual financial benefit as well.
I'm excited for this conversation, Dylan, because when we speak about investing goals, you often speak in generalities. I want to retire early, or I want to have more choice, or I want financial freedom. And I think part of that is because it's so far away, it's hard to think about what that is. But it's also because I will put my hand up and say, I don't really have a clear idea of what retirement looks like and the different options for retirement and how you get out of work and what you do with your time, all of that stuff that I'm sure you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So let's start with just retirement. What is it? How do you help your clients think about it? And then I think we can talk about some different strategies and stuff like that. But let's start general. Retirement ?
So basically you sit on the couch, you see the mailman come in. No. Retirement's different for everyone. So, and that's the probably one of the most enjoyable parts of my job is that literally every single person has something different that they want in retirement. Like Bryce might want to drive around in a 1930s convertible, and you might want to sit on the couch, right? Like that, and both of those are completely fine, right? But timing of it, how much you need, all those sort of things are completely individual. So what retirement is we call it a point at which you have a choice to draw an income from a source that is not labour or work. So it's at a point where you've chosen that from now on you don't want to go out and work every day, and you want to be able to go out and do something that doesn't generate income. It could be that you've built up enough assets. It could be that you're just sick of working and you want to stop. But that choice is where it lies, and often that conversation comes back to income. So because it is a point where you're no longer generating income through work, you have to figure out, how do we generate an income through something else, because life isn't free. You might have a house, but you still have to pay power bills, you still have to pay for food, you still have to pay for all of those things. And more often than not, it's actually being a little bit more aspirational. So you want to pay for all those things, but I also want to go to Europe every year or an overseas holiday or something like that.
I aspire to retire as early as possible. And by retire, it means, I guess, have the financial flexibility to not rely on a paycheck. So that doesn't mean stop working, but get to a point where my asset pool is.
Well, I think if you continue to not look at your losses in your portfolio, like your episode from a few weeks ago, and count your returns as 18%, then absolutely, you'll be there very, very soon.
Yeah, but did you listen to the follow-on from that where when I do count my losses,
You still did all right.
still
You
have
still did all right.
This might be going too far into the weeds, but let's say I stay on this track for the next 10 years with the portfolio that I've got. It's not a portfolio that's set up to generate income. It's a portfolio that's set up to generate growth. And I come to you in 10 years, I'm early 40s, and I'm like, all right, I want to do something about this. Is the suggestion you now need to start pouring money into income generating assets, or is it flip the portfolio completely, take the assets that you've built and sell off and put into income generating? Does that make sense?
It does. It's not necessarily either one of those things, because just because a portfolio has an income generating portion to it. So, people often talk about dividends as being, in terms of equities, being an income generating investment. Well, capital growth is income as well if you sell and realise that capital growth. So return and realising that return and actually getting it and spending money on something, that's income. So when we talk about income, we don't talk about the specifics of where it's come from, although we will design portfolios in certain ways to take advantage of tax positions for people and whatever else. But if your portfolio is returning 10% capital growth a year, and at that point you're able to sell down whatever it is from that capital growth, that is income.
Yeah.
And it's taxable based on the fact that when you sell it, you realise it in the same way when you get paid, that's taxable. The same way when you get paid a dividend, it's taxable. The difference between a dividend strategy like an income strategy and capital growth strategy is you have to actually physically sell things down. So it does get a little bit more complicated than just living off a consistent dividend return. But that's why you would go and see someone who can help you do it.
Yeah.
I guess the other difference is risk, and Bryce's speckies, they might be averaging 10% a year, but they're certainly not consistently giving him 10% a year. When you're thinking about that transition from, I guess, the mode we're in now, which is like all out growth, 100% equities, maybe even some crypto,
100% Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's like it's like growth without goals almost. It's like just grow as much as possible over the next couple of decades.
Yeah.
When does that transition start to, all right, now I'm going to take more defensive income paying positions, like I'm going to start tilting the portfolio in different ways? Let's say you're trying to retire at 65, like when do you start making all those moves?
When you actually have that date in mind, say it's 65, I think that's when you can start to think about transitioning in from, maybe the last 10 years, right? But the reason you do it is not because you want to change the assets that you hold necessarily, although perhaps selling out of some of those more risky positions, if you've done well out of them in particular, it's not a bad idea. One of the things you think about is income, and generating income from work is a stable form of revenue that you can relatively consistently generate. So it's safe. It's a safety net. If you take that away, your ability to generate that same level of income from specky stocks is not there in the same level of risk. So yes, you can still hold some of them, and perhaps those positions would be smaller, but being able to go to work every day it's a safety net. It's about risk more than it is anything. So what we do is we look at people's stage of life and we go, how far away are you from that point at which you want to either slow down or stop working? How much income are you going to generate up until that point? And then work backwards to say, okay, well, at this stage, we're going to move 25% of your equity portfolio into some long-term fixed interest assets that are going to pay a regular yield of 5% or something like that. Because we then know that even though we will still get some growth, we're being a bit more protective and we've got a bit more certainty that we're going to be able to make that choice, which we've decided is what makes us happy.
In prep for this episode, you mentioned that you use the slogan "Get Rich Slow" a lot with your clients, and this is one that we've spoken about plenty of times on the show. We wrote a book about it. Like it's well known, but I guess what does it mean to you, and how do you I guess, bring it to life in terms of the planning that you do with your clients?
Well, a lot of the stuff we do is for accumulators, particularly those people like we talked about at the start, those people in their 30s, it might be 30 years away. And I don't, think about where I was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I was in creche or kinder. I wasn't thinking about what my retirement position was like. And for someone to look 30 years ahead when that is their entire life or most of their entire life right now, for me to say you need to put 30% of your wealth away, your income away, it's pretty daunting. But if you give them context, and if you start in your 30s, you can generally get away with 5 or 10%, which is much more manageable. And being able to do that little incremental saving gives you a lot of small milestones that you meet. And it also gives you this sort of ability to live your life with a lot more freedom, knowing that you're on track because you're regularly meeting these small milestones.
And so are the milestones in that situation just like dollar amounts? Like you're just going to say, if you're sticking on track in a year, we should be here. In 5, we should be here.
Yeah, so we do something with every client where we do we do a 10 or 20 year, depending on their age, like a progress tracker. And every year we look at where they started with us and we show them all their investable assets that we're looking after. And we say, cool, we're ahead by 20 grand this year. Next year, actually, based on poor market conditions, we're a little bit behind. And we make changes based on what they're doing in those individual years. It's really motivating to have those smaller milestones. There's a really good book called Atomic Habits, which is not necessarily a finance book, but people love it when we recommend that they read it because it gets you into the point of going, cool, if I put $10 a day away, that's amazing what it ends up being at the end of the year. That's something that I can do without even thinking. And all of a sudden I've saved an extra, $3,650. Like little things like that are not noticeable. That's what getting rich slow is. It's about not saying I want to click my fingers and make 1,000% on something tomorrow. It's I'm just going to incrementally do things that I don't notice, and hopefully it comes to be a good long-term strategy.
Pot of gold at the end.
Yeah, that's right.
So Atomic Habits is all about habit stacking, and it's like you find something you're doing well and you try and put other things you want to do around that, and you stack good habits on top of each other. So what are some of the tips and tricks you have for your clients when it comes to financial habit stacking?
So the most obvious one is savings habits. We will get people to save for the first time sometimes, and they will put money away that they haven't been able to do previously. And even probably a better example of that is superannuation. For getting people in their 40s or 50s to start contributing extra to superannuation when they've never done it before and they think superannuation is 20 or 15 or 10 years away of being able to actually be used is really, really hard. So you start with, cool, we're going to take $100 a fortnight. It's going to come out pre-tax. You won't notice it. And they go, no worries. And then what you find is they come back to you 6 months later. We have our check-in call and they go, how's your salary sacrifice? Oh, I didn't even know it. Did that happen?
Yeah.
And you go, yeah, it did. And actually, you've put an extra $1,000 into superannuation. Do you want to? Maybe we could do a little bit more. And you find that over the first couple of years, you sort of increase it very incrementally. But then we're maxing out concessional contribution caps after 5 years, and people don't even know.
Yeah.
And the effect that has on their retirement savings and therefore their income capacity later on. So in terms of stacking things, it's starting small, helping people understand the little benefit, and then building.
Yeah.
Works for both superannuation and for normal savings into investments like Raise and formerly Acorns used to do the same thing, right?
Yeah. Still do, I think.
Yeah, still do. There you go. Yeah. Good on you, Raise.
You said people in their 40s contributing more to super. Is that generally what you feel is the age bracket people should seriously start thinking about it?
Oh, I think everyone should consider doing it earlier, but what we
Price was hoping for a 10 years get out of jail free card.
I'm like, I'm sweet, right? I'm sweet.
I was like, surely you know what the answer to this question is going to be.
Well, I've been self-employed for how long? He doesn't have a super fund anymore. 40s is where, like, a lot of our clients fall into that bracket. A lot of our accumulator clients will fall into that 40s and 50s bracket. We do have younger clients as well, but we tend to find that their income earning capacity is at its highest at that point. And also they've been through some of the more challenging steps in terms of building up that deposit and buying that first house. They've more often than not had children before their 40s as well. So they've probably been through the initial stages of having to change where they're allocating that cash flow to. We talk about all the different savings habits that you can do for the next 20 years of your life. Superannuation starts to become something where people really can afford to do it, and they also, it's getting just to that point where they start going, that's a thing that I'm gonna use one day. So
Sweet. So I still got it.
You got heaps of time. So I think, Dylan, if we just sort of pause here, we've really spoken about, I guess, some of the more general financial habits, some of the things you want to see from your clients. And I think right now it's pretty reassuring. It's nothing crazy. It's starting early, starting small and building. It's thinking about super and contributing if you can. And it's about getting invested and letting compounding do its thing. Great. But a lot of the clients that you are seeing who are a little bit older have a lot more complexity in their lives than, say, Bryce and I have at the moment, because, right now it's just grow your assets, live your life, try and get into property. That's about the long and the short of it. But in the next sort of 10, 15 years, it's kids potentially. It's, if you have kids, it's then education costs. It's trying to get out of a mountain of debt that is your mortgage. And it's, a lot more goals, more competing goals when it's things like trying to prepare myself for retirement, trying to give my kids everything that they need in life and, everything else. So how do you address the complexity of competing goals? And then I want to drill down into some of them a little bit more specifically.
Yeah, it's a really tricky one. Everyone is different, like I said earlier, and people often do need to make sacrifices. So I'm a massive economics nerd. I did economics at uni, and I will generally refer back to my first year economics classes more than any other class that I did. The main things that we talk about there is opportunity cost. So if you want to live in a $2 million house, well, the cost of that might be that you're not going to have the cash flow to send your kids to private school. So do you live in a $1.7 million house and be able to fund your kids' education, or are you dead set on that $2 million house? Having a $2 million house is wonderful, but having kids that are really well educated in the school that you went to and things is also wonderful. So getting people to realise that there is actual financial consequences of the choices they make, and there is a cost, an opportunity cost for choosing one over another, and then you rank them. So you go, what's most important to you? Once we've got those things ranked in a way, we can actually start to manipulate, how we can look to do both using different financial strategies. So private school education is a wonderful goal. I think we are very, very lucky in this country to have incredible public school education, and we're also very lucky to have the choice of sending kids to, schools with great facilities and things like that, but it is very, very expensive.
Stupidly expensive.
I'm going to sound like a broken record, but if you plan early for these things, you can actually use investment return to pay some of those school fees. Some of the time, it's as simple as taking, $20,000 or $30,000 out of your portfolio, and then for every 10 years putting $300 a month away. That will generally pay for years 9, 10, 11 and 12 of a $30,000 a year school fee, if you start before your kids are 5.
Okay, sorry. Say that again.
Yeah, say that again.
Yeah. Let me just take some notes.
Yeah.
So if you think
your kid's 5 years old.
Your kid's 5 years old.
Yeah.
You want to send your kids to high school.
Yep.
High school education, and you want to pay for private school from year 7 to year 12. $30,000 a year, 6 years, $180,000.
Yeah.
Right?
Per kid.
Let's say one kid for the purpose. I can't deal with any more complexity.
One child. One child policy.
Yeah. So $180,000 is what we need.
$180,000. School fees. That's it. Once you pay them, it's after-tax money as well.
Yeah.
So
that's nuts.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
Nuts. After tax.
So often what we do is we look at, okay, well, what's the final cost that we're trying to get to and what's the timeline that we're trying to get to? If kid's 5, you've got 13 or 14 years of investable time to get there, and we'll work backwards. We'll say, okay, well, we've got $30,000 now. What is the amount that we need to put away each month into an investment that will compound so that we cover X amount of school fees using that investment return? And we work backwards. We will also then generally use a tax-effective structure like a education bond or an investment bond, where you can start to draw out in those later years 9, 10, 11 and 12, without any capital gains consequences.
Yeah. So
Gotcha.
I was going to ask about the education bond and investment bond. Can you, I'm sure there are people listening who aren't familiar with those terms. So give us the 101 on how they work and how you can access them.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyone can access them. They are effectively a bond structure, a trust bond structure. They operate under a specific Insurance Bond Act. They have a favourable tax overlay where the most you can be taxed on anything held within that is 30%, and more often than not, due to things like franking credits, the underlying investments are taxed a little bit lower. So if you have a marginal tax bracket of 47%, including your Medicare levy, and any investments you hold in that are going to be taxed at 47%, you have a favourable tax benefit of about 17 cents on the dollar. The main benefit, and the reason that these still exist now, is that after 10 years, you can generally withdraw the capital gain made, so the growth on that, without paying the capital gains tax on that investment. And that is why it's useful to pay for education later, because if you were to save that into your own investment and you had built up a capital gain but were still earning decent money at that time, you'd pull it out, but you'd have to pay up to 47% on that gain.
And you can only use the investment bonds for certain purposes? Is that no? Okay.
So investment bonds can be used for anything.
Okay.
It's a really there's certain restrictions on like how you access them, what the tax treatment of that is, and I don't want to get too in depth in it. Like, you know, by all means, if anybody is interested, go and see an advisor and talk about.
Oh no, go to equitymates.com/advice and say you want to speak to Dylan.
Say you want to speak to Dylan.
Touch.
Yeah, that's right. Come and see me. We'll talk investment bonds. No. So there's certain structures, but it's highly encouraged saving. And that's why there is a tax benefit behind it. So originally they were around before compulsory superannuation was around.
Okay. The one thing that I reckon confused me for years about investment bonds and education bonds is I thought they were bonds, like fixed income bonds, but no, they're actually like trust structures, as you said. They're wrappers, but then what you can invest in is really any investment.
Yeah, so there's a whole number of different providers. I won't name them on the podcast necessarily because we don't have favourites. They will have anywhere between 20 and 65 investment options that you can choose from. And, you know, you can go and have, you know, a growth index, or you can have some active management. You can make your own picks. You can have really defensive assets. Like I've got some clients at the moment who had an inheritance that was deemed to be from a parent that was actually to go to their grandchildren, but they want to keep it in cash and fixed interest because they don't want the capital to go away. Now, I said that they were a little bit silly, but and I'm happy to say that I said that to their face, and putting the money away for 10 years. But, you know, at the moment you're getting 5% in a cash account. Even 5% for these clients would be a tax burden. So having it in that bond structure is really effective for them.
It must be nice.
Yeah.
So Dylan, how do you advise the older accumulators when it comes to the challenge or the choice between paying down debt and your mortgage at the same time in your life where you're really wanting to start boosting super and putting into education bonds and building up that investment portfolio? What's your strategies there?
If we just stick to superannuation versus paying down debt, often we'll look at whether or not it's likely that person is going to have debt at the moment that they're retiring. So if that person gets to retirement, they've still got $500,000 worth of debt, and their goal is to pay off their mortgage and not have debt in retirement, then we need to find a way to make that happen. one strategy that we use a fair bit is actually maximising people's superannuation contributions in lieu of extra debt payments, with a goal of making a significant tax-free withdrawal at retirement and clearing the balance of the debt.
Okay, that's
and the
cool.
reason that works is because you get the tax benefits every single year of those contributions going in from money that's before tax. Whereas if you're paying off your debt,
After.
you pay it off with after-tax dollars.
Yeah.
You then also get market capital returns, and if you've got the cash flow to pay your mortgage over that time, then happy days. So you should be achieving at least what your mortgage is within your superannuation account, plus you're getting the tax benefit up front. So you end up with more by doing it that way.
Do many people retire with debt, like on the house?
Yeah, a lot nowadays it's a lot more
Yeah.
common. So a lot of our clients who are already in or just about to go into retirement, they probably bought their house in Darlinghurst for 64 cents and a packet of twisties in the 1970s. But no, like a lot of our clients now, forecasting 10 years into the future, will still have a lump sum of debt to pay off at retirement. And superannuation is a wonderful tax-effective vehicle to pull money from at that point. If you've got your money in an account-based pension and you're no longer working, that's tax-free. You pull money out at 0% tax. So if you've got 300 grand out, like that you need to pull out, do it then.
Yeah.
Not saying that you can't also have a mortgage in retirement, but it's a very common strategy that we look at.
Dylan, we're going to take a quick break here, and on the other side, we've got a few more questions about this transition to retirement.
Happy days.
Welcome back to Equity Mates. We're speaking to Dylan Pargiter-Green. He is the director at Bold Wealth. If you want to speak to Dylan, you can go to equitymates.com/advice and we will connect you. Now, Dylan, I've got a note here around the golden years and why they call the last 10 years of our working life the golden years. So why should we look forward to our 50s, I guess?
We call it the golden years because the last 10 years of our working life are generally the time when we have the most income and also have built up the assets to the highest point that they have ever been by that point. And so the decisions that you make with those assets and that income have more effect at that point than they ever have had before, and potentially ever will have again in the
so it's
future.
your peak.
It's a peak.
Everything from that point.
Basically,
Yeah, it's kind of like the culmination of everything that you...
if you've made the right decisions, it's your peak.
Yeah.
But if you've made the right decisions, you get to sit at your peak, and if you've made the wrong ones, you'll start to fall down the mountain pretty quickly. So maybe that's incentive to go and see an advisor sooner.
Well, on that, we started this conversation by asking what are people screwing up in their 30s, and you said some of those basics of like getting started, all of that stuff. What are the pitfalls in your 40s and 50s that you see people who did start well then make those mistakes that they then aren't at their peak in the golden years?
I think not sticking to the plan. So not continuing to do the very, very small basic stuff. I'm a massive believer in enjoying our life whilst we're living it, and too often I have to have conversations with clients more about the fact that they should be spending more of their money and that they are on track, rather than having conversations about reining it in. And it's a wonderful position to be in because, I can tell people that they can go and buy the car that they've always wanted to buy, or that they get to go on family holidays, and they don't have to fly Malaysian Airlines or and potentially fall out of the sky. That's a genuine stressor for a lot of people. So
What, Malaysian Airlines?
falling out of the sky. It's all right. We've always got them set up with good life insurance. So the main pitfalls really are falling away from the plan and making sure that, not thinking about how I could continuously do a little bit better. Often we'll get to a stage with people where their income significantly increases throughout their 40s into their early 50s, but instead, and their lifestyle changes. So what we originally planned for might have been to live off, what we see as a comfortable lifestyle adjusted for inflation. Now their lifestyle involves some much more luxurious things, and they, buy a massive house and they buy this. And so they overcapitalise and over-leverage themselves to a point where they potentially can't get back from there without having to then sell assets and not feel very good about themselves, or work longer into retirement. So, yeah, the biggest thing is, live within your means, but live well. And do those little things.
Live within your means, but live well. That might be the title of the episode.
Yeah.
Nice.
I don't mind it. The golden years.
So the general rule of thumb that, is written about quite often when it comes to figuring out how much you need to retire is that 4% rule. Is that still applicable?
Yeah, the amount that you can safely draw down without running out of money over a 30-year period.
Yeah.
Yeah. And look, there's a whole number of different
Of course, there's plenty of factors.
Like 4% of your asset value, because if you've got 5 investment properties and they're paying you a 4% yield on what their value is, is that 4%?
I think,
are we talking investment assets? Because you probably don't need to draw down at all at that point.
These studies are mainly about retirement accounts, 401ks and superannuation.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So look,
you're the financial planner, not us.
Look, I think it depends on what your asset base is. 4%'s a really, it generally will mean that your assets outlive you.
Yeah.
And we always talk about confidence levels and risk and whether or not you're going to meet your retirement income goal. My argument is that most people don't spend enough in retirement. And what we tend to find is that people think that they have to retire later, and as a result, continue working into some of the most enjoyable years of what could be their retirement, where they can enjoy that income that they've worked so hard for. And then what we tend to do is when we reach our 70s, mid-70s in particular, we actually dramatically reduce our spending, because our capacity to internationally travel goes away, and we generally don't go, sporting holidays or anything like that. We just don't do it statistically. So we very much tell people to set things up so that they have the ability to draw down sooner. And I would argue that 4% might mean that your assets last really, beyond you. But that's not the point of building the assets. Yes, legacy is important, and handing down that money is important. But actually, you've worked all your life to build assets so that you can enjoy them, and you should.
That's what my dad says. My parents remind me regularly that leaving us nothing.
My parents last year went on a 6-month holiday because they were like, we're going to spend the money while we can.
Yeah.
And they were like, we enjoyed it so much, we're doing 4 months this year.
Nice.
So.
Yeah, my dad recently retired, and he decided to build a studio apartment underneath his house. So, the house I grew up in is on a very, very steep hill, sandstone and everything. And I think he massively underestimated the amount that it was going to cost him. And he just looks at me one day, I was at his house for dinner, and he goes, you'll be all right. You're doing pretty well for yourself. I was like, thanks, Dad. Thanks for that. He just got back from, spending 4 weeks surfing on the East Coast and things.
Nice.
So he's living the way I tell him to, though, which is go and actually enjoy it, because it's your money. You've done all the things, spent all that time building it. So go and enjoy yourself. There's a really good book, actually, and I'd like to suggest it for book club.
Okay.
It's a book that I'm on my second read. It's called Die with Zero.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of it. I haven't read it, so yeah.
It's by a guy called Bill Perkins, who is not a financial advisor at all. He was a very successful engineer. And it's got some wonderful concepts in it around why you should spend your money, and why you should not only spend your money on yourself, but give to your kids early so that you can see them enjoying the benefits of the money that you were eventually going to give to them later.
Nice.
Giving to charities and foundations early so that you can see the benefit, because there's no prize for being the richest person in the cemetery. You don't die with your money, you don't get buried with it. And what happens after that point, who knows?
Yeah. I think the early piece as well is playing out, particularly in a lot of capital cities with the price of housing. A lot of people are getting their inheritance
parents
brought forward.
Yeah.
Here you go.
Absolutely, and so it should. Like, if we're modelling someone out to have $6 million when they die, like, why not give some to your kids now? Right? That's when they need it.
Yeah.
I think
otherwise they're going to live in a share house with 6 other dudes for the next.
No, it's good advice. I think it all comes down to confidence, and I think a lot of the things that you've been speaking about around live within your means but live well. It's like when the more confident people are that whatever they're doing will get them to where they need to go, then they can start spending more. But I think so much of it is just like a lack of confidence about job security, the economy, everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And like a lot of those things an advisor can't help, right? Like I can't help the economy, I can't help inflation, I can't help whether or not you're good at your job or not. If you see an advisor in the same way that if you go and see any other professional, they will generally lay out a roadmap so that you have confidence that if you follow certain steps, you will be fine. And sometimes that peace of mind that, hey, everything's going to be all right, is worth a lot more than whatever the investment return over the last 12 months was.
Well, I think that's a good point to leave it.
Yeah.
So, Dylan, thank you for joining us. This won't be the last time you come on the podcast. So, until next time, if you want to speak to Dylan and get some of that confidence that he's offering, go to equitymates.com/advice. On the form there, if you say you want to speak to Dylan specifically, we'll put you in touch.
Thanks very much, boys.
Thank you.
Love it.
You have been listening to an Equity Mates Media production. In the spirit of reconciliation, Equity Mates Media acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. This podcast is intended for education and entertainment purposes. Any advice is general advice only and has not taken into account your personal financial circumstances, needs or objectives. Before acting on general advice, you should consider if it is relevant to your needs and read the relevant product disclosure statement. And if you're unsure, please speak to a financial professional. The hosts of this podcast and their guests may have positions in the companies mentioned. Equity Mates Media operates under an Australian Financial Services Licence 540697.